Mental Health Momentum, a Silicon Slopes podcast. I'm Dr. David Morgan. I'm a licensed psychologist and the Director of Mental Health Awareness here at Silicon Slopes. And on this podcast, we talk about mental health issues in business and beyond, and we look for solutions. I'm going to introduce my guest, and I'm going to say my new friend. Yeah?
Yes, of
totally,
course.
yes. This is Britany Davies, who goes by Brit.
I do.
That's right. Let me tell you about Brit. She is the Chief People Officer at Fullcast, a leading RevOps platform dedicated to aligning people, processes, and revenue. With nearly 20 years of human resources leadership, Brit blends strategic foresight with a people-first philosophy. She oversees all aspects of Fullcast people operations, including talent and performance, engagement, and culture design, ensuring that organizational growth and culture move in lockstep. Brit is also a passionate advocate for workplace equity, serving as spoke leader and advisor for a bolder way forward in the areas of the gender pay gap and sexual harassment and gender-based discrimination. She's also the creator of the At Will Economy podcast, which explores the systems that shape how we work as everyday Americans. She was recognized as one of the Poets and Quant's 2023 Best and Brightest Executive MBA students while earning her degree from Brigham Young University's Marriott School of Business. She also holds a Senior Professional in Human Resources certification. That's some good stuff.
Wow, that's a mouthful.
Sounds good, right?
I feel like we
When
should
you
have
hear it?
condensed that a bit, to be honest.
Oh, that's a
with you.
short one.
Is it?
Sometimes
Okay.
I'm like 5 minutes in and I'm still reading the bio. And so, no, that is awesome. And I love that you're here and for the stuff that you're doing. So, and we've had a great conversation even before the podcast. So this is just like, keep going.
Right? It's
right?
been great to get to know you. I feel like you're a long lost friend that I just didn't realize I had. So.
Well, that's amazing. You look a little bit like one of my cousins.
Oh, maybe that's why.
Maybe that's what it is. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I did
and
tell
I love
you.
my cousins. They're wonderful.
I did tell you my maiden name is Morgan.
That's right.
So it's possible we could be related and have no idea.
Related. And then I told you that my wife's maiden name is Morgan, which was the biggest selling point. She was like, "Don't have to change my name." Sounds great.
Perfect.
Yeah, sounds great.
I
can
that.
overlook all the other things. That's fine. Let's get married. So, well, tell us a little bit about just like your own experiences with mental health, either you personally or people you know, and kind of your interest in it.
Yeah, I would honestly say I feel like most people to some extent have experiences with mental health. You know, I would be surprised to find anyone who would tell you that they don't.
Right.
On an individual level, you know, I've definitely dealt with things around that. When I was a kid, I always had sleeping issues, which as I got older kind of were diagnosed as anxiety disorders that as I evolved into, you know, my 30s, turned into a diagnosis of ADD, strangely enough. I have 2 kids. I have an 8-year-old and a 12-year-old. And last night, as I was thinking through, you know, maybe what I was going to talk about today, I got permission from my 12-year-old to talk a little about his story because I wanted to make sure he was comfortable with that. But we have dealt with an interesting journey with my 12-year-old in terms of mental health as of recently. A few months ago, I got a call from his school counselor. And what she said to me was that they run algorithms from time to time on the data that's collected through all of the school systems. And they had come across a journal that my son had been keeping connected to just a Word document or a Google Doc on his account. And that and that the algorithm had flagged some of the words and the things that were being said within kind of that journal. And that moment as a parent is probably, you know, one of the moments I'll remember for the rest of my life in realizing that my son was not at a good place from a mental health perspective. I remember going into the counselor's office. My husband met me there, and I couldn't help but just cry, to be honest with you, because it was just such a shock. He's such a just sweet and joyous kid to be around. He's always had a very kind of old soul in terms of personality. So I've always known he could feel things like very deeply. Like there was no doubt in my mind his ability to feel things on a deeper level was present, and that probably was contributing to the situation. Also, you know, in researching this and thinking through kind of what we were going through, one thing that's unique and interesting about my son is that he was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when he was 5 years old. And there is a significant overlap in terms of mental health issues between type 1 diabetics and anxiety disorders or, you know, all of those things.
There's so many things to have to worry about that your peers don't. And I can imagine that probably creates another layer of emotional stuff.
Yeah. I think for him, it definitely has. Uh, as a parent or a caregiver of someone who has diabetes type 1 specifically, I think, in my opinion, there are two things that I think are really contributing to that. And one, I think people underestimate the impact that has on someone's sleep, their sleep patterns. And like we talked about earlier, if you're going to be a diabetic, this is the best time in life to do it.
The history of the world, yeah.
Right? Because you have, the continuous
Yes.
glucose monitors, and you have the insulin pumps, and you have all of those things to help you manage through a really, really terrible disease. But those bells and whistles are constantly going off, and they're interrupting his sleep patterns all the time. And I think that definitely contributes to the situation. And then just, I think there's this extra burden of responsibility that you put on such a young person. I mean, he was 5 when he was diagnosed, right? Where they have to learn this sense of self-control, and they have to regulate things, and they have to worry about their medical condition all the time. That's just not a normal thing for a 5-year-old kid. And, he's 12 and he does an amazing job managing it. I think every time I speak with his teachers, they're always so complimentary about his ability to care for himself and to be so responsible. But I think that takes a toll on a kid, and I definitely, as a parent, I do what I can to kind of allow him to have his vices. The amount of Diet Mountain Dew that he consumes is unnatural. But that's kind of the one thing that he loves. And because and he's like every other kid, in terms of managing that care, he can eat anything anyone else can eat. He just has to show more control because he can't necessarily eat it if he's high, right? And he may have to eat a smaller portion, or he has to wait until his insulin kind of kicks in. And sometimes, if he's been high for a good portion of the day, we do limit his sugar and say, listen, it's not happening, bro. You're
another Diet Mountain Dew.
Yeah, have another Diet Mountain Dew and some beef jerky because the Skittles are not going to happen today. So, I think that is hard. I think that's hard. But we're very, very hopeful. There's so much going on in the world of type 1 diabetes care that didn't exist 5 years ago. I was actually researching earlier this week because from an investment standpoint, I wanted to make some investments into some biotech companies right now. And there are so many that are right on the verge of making huge breakthroughs within that space. And their stories, I think, are really compelling and kind of beautiful. I know there's a gentleman named, what was his name? Doug Melton out of Harvard University, who actually started a company that was an amalgamation of his 2 children's name because they both had type 1 diabetes, and he's been searching for a cure. His company was acquired by a company called Veritex a few years ago for, 900 something, crazy amounts of money, and they're doing really well. And many people are predicting that they may find the cure because they have the capital there and available to them. They've been successful in finding cures or medicine to treat cystic fibrosis, I think. And so they're kind of employing that and all of the knowledge and systems they have to find a cure with type 1. There are many biotech companies right now that are on the verge of that, but that's one that I think is pretty notable. That's kind of a beautiful thing when you think of it from a parent's perspective, really as a researcher, going out and saying, okay, I'm going to cure this for my kids is kind of a cool thing. So.
Well, and on the mental health side as well, you're talking about this algorithm that kind of found these patterns in your son's, in your son's writing. Yeah. It is wild, but wonderful as well, right? Because that maybe with things like that, tools like that can help, introduce conversations. Kind of the old school way of doing that is we sit down with people and we say, how are you feeling? And that kind of trying to open that dialogue. And that still needs to happen, right? I'm sure, like you said, that afternoon in your counselor's office was probably not the last time that you and your son and your husband sat down and talked about this. Yeah. And it's opened a conversation probably about how to process feelings and it's okay to feel things. And at the same time, there are probably outcomes that we need to not worry about or not plan or predict and stuff, right? And so you do all those things, but it's through technology that became available. So I do think that those are going to work together. I think that will,
it's amazing, right?
Bless us. I know. It's a great time to be alive.
Yeah, right? I remember calling our CEO and saying, I may need to take a little bit of time off because we're dealing with my son, but I found the best AI use case.
Yeah.
Finally, that's actually helping humanity in some way, and this is what's happening in our family. Because we hear a lot of doom and gloom right now about kind of
Yeah.
what's going on, specifically in the tech space. It's just everywhere.
Right.
And so seeing it in some way benefit our family has been a really cool thing. For my son, I think that's been hard, right? Because for him, it probably felt a bit like an invasion of his
Sure.
privacy.
Yeah.
One of the first things that I did after that happened is I actually went out and bought him just like a physical journal. I like to write. It's obvious that he likes to
Yeah.
write as well. And that's a release for him. And I wanted him to have that outlet moving forward. And I know from a mental health perspective, it's important he continues to have that outlet. And it's okay to have negative thoughts, and it's okay to have challenges, And I think the best thing he can do is process through it and
Right.
write it down. And so the last thing I wanted him to do was stop
Right.
doing that. And so I grabbed a journal and I gave it to him, and I said, "This is back in my day. This is how we
This is a
used
pencil.
Right,
Yeah.
right. This is how we used to do it." And I said, I had a diary growing up, and I remember writing in it, and I remember occasionally, coming across it and finding my brother had slit the little piece of paper that would hold it together with the lock, right? And I said, "But I think you're safe at our house. I don't think your little brother is going to come in and try to break open your journal and see what's in there."
Right.
So, yesterday I asked him, I said, "Do you continue to write it? Do you do you use it?" And he said, yes. He said he's an amazing artist, actually. And he said he spends a lot of time drawing, and that tends to be more of an outlet for him in that.
One of the things I think that's important as well is just playing off of that is that people think that it's not okay to have certain emotions, right? And so then they get stuck because they say, well, I can't feel this way. I shouldn't be feeling this way.
Right.
And then that brings all sorts of other emotions on top of that, of the, feeling stupid or feeling ashamed
Yeah.
or feeling anxious because you can't get your way out of it. And giving people permission to do that and to feel that way is critical. I love that, where you work at Fullcast, that you're able to talk to your boss and just say, you know what, I need some time for this.
Yeah.
You with your experience in HR, you know how important that is for people to feel like it's okay to ask for this, because so many don't.
Right.
They're ashamed of the fact they feel that way in the first place. So the last thing they're going to do is go to their manager and say, hey, I might need a couple of days off because I'm feeling, pretty crummy about this. And I don't think that does the business any favors.
No, definitely not. I mean, all the research points to, a lack of productivity, a lack of engagement. It'll wear and tear on your health insurance plan and
Right.
renewals to some extent as well, in the utilization with that. So there's nothing that would tell you that that's a positive culture to have. And I am lucky in that the company that we work for, in the leadership team we have, we do talk about mental health. In fact, on our last company meeting, our CEO was talking about how one of the most important things he does every day is meditate. Culturally, just having those conversations is probably one of the best things that you can do
Yeah.
for your company, is just ensuring that people feel safe enough to talk about the struggles that they're having and the coping mechanisms that they're creating, so that they can share that with others, giving everyone permission to show a little bit of vulnerability, right? And to be able to raise their hand and say, I'm not okay. I need a little bit of time, or I need some help with this. That is definitely such a huge component. I think companies spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on these crazy EAP programs
Yes.
that do all kinds of fancy things. And it's like, at the end of the day, if you just did a few small things, if you asked your managers not to be too concerned when someone requests a sick day, or told your leaders to talk about what they do to stay healthy or cope with mental health, to tell stories around that. Those are some of the most impactful things you can do, and they cost you nothing. They
Right.
really cost you nothing.
And it mostly doesn't need to start from the top.
Absolutely.
It has
Yeah.
to, right? It can't be like, at the HR level
Right.
or the manager level, because if it's not being reflected
Correct.
at the highest levels of the company, then it doesn't matter what your manager tells you. If your boss is up there, the big boss saying, well, I've never struggled with anything,
Mhm.
and I just push through all the time because that's what we have to do in this business, that message is going to get completely obliterated by not even even if it's not even spoken, but if it's just demonstrated,
Yeah,
right?
just that implied
Yeah.
conversation that's taking place often, I think is such a big deal for cultures. And I think, older generations have a harder time, right? Generationally, you see definitely boomers, the Generation X, Generation Y, we struggle a little bit more to be more vulnerable, to talk about mental health issues. The younger generations
Right.
that are emerging are not that way. It's not even something that I don't think that they're ashamed about it. I think that there's also an expectation that comes with what they're looking for in an employer to support them through, those moments that are difficult for them, and to provide perks and benefits and resources that support their mental health. They see that as table stakes. They're not seeing that as something that sets you aside as an employer of choice. They see that as something you're required to do. So
I think we're in this strange transition period where we've got, like you said, kind of this older generation that is still making all of these major decisions, yet they're making them on behalf of a younger generation, which is their primary workforce.
Yeah.
Right. And so like in 20 years, when Gen Z and millennials are all the CEOs, I don't think we'll have an issue, right? Because I mean, well, maybe we will. It might be a different issue, but you know what I'm saying?
Sure.
They will say like, of course we address mental health. Of course we take time for ourselves, because that's the way we've been living our whole lives, as opposed to a generation where I don't know that it was as significant an issue, or if it was, it certainly wasn't talked about. And so, yeah, it's a strange place we find ourselves in now.
Yeah, I agree. I think the alpha generation that's coming up is
your kids are alpha.
My
right?
kids are alpha. I think my 12-year-old is on the cusp between Gen Z and alpha. Is that right?
Millennial and alpha, right? Is it?
I think so. I'm a millennial.
I can't remember.
I am like a side partying, sourdough making, proud millennial. I know that much. And then I think the cutoff is like 2012, and I think it goes to Gen Z.
And then Gen Z
and
after
then I
that,
think it goes
and
to
then alpha after that.
And so,
I'm Gen X, so I'm old. Yeah.
So, everything you said is correct. And I think every time the new generation comes out, there is so much kind of shame and fear and anxiety between the generations that exist, and kind of this judgment. I remember as the millennials were coming on the map, everyone was, oh, you guys are lazy and you're entitled and all of these things. And, maybe to some extent that's true compared to other generations, but I also think that there's a sense of empathy that's often lacking in the way that we look at that, in understanding that each generation is really a product of what they've grown up within, right? The millennials grew up in an interesting time where, they got out of college and it was the '08 recession. And they've had a hard time finding jobs. They were given similar promises to the prior generation where they thought they'd just go to college, get a great job.
Right.
That hasn't really played out. And now they have student loans on top of that. The housing market is in a tough spot. Most of them can't afford houses, let alone the generations after that, right? And so I think just trying to understand people on more of a human level, and realizing oftentimes, people are a product of their environment. Now, I'm not saying, you shouldn't work hard and you shouldn't try your best, but I think just recognizing that and just acknowledging that to someone probably means more than many would know and understand.
Absolutely. I think part of the challenge is people think that understanding is the same thing as coddling, which it's not. And they're very against coddling. I'm against coddling too. I think we should be expected to do what we have agreed to do. And coddling would be like, oh, you're having a hard day. Okay, well then don't do anything. And they kind of look at it in a very dichotomous, a very black and white way. Well, if I'm not holding their feet to the fire, then I'm coddling them. And that's not true, because there's all sorts of space in the middle of that. And like you said, just space for understanding, just to be able to have a conversation with someone and say, tell me about what your experience is, what you're going through. I think most people want to do well, and they want to feel productive. They want to feel part of a team. They want to feel like they're doing something awesome. And we just have to approach that maybe just a little differently than we've had to in the last 50 years, which that's just the way it goes.
Yeah.
And you could talk to someone in the 1700s. They'd probably say the same thing. It's those 1650 people. They were the problem, right?
For sure. I totally agreed. Who knows what, the future generations will look like, right? I think Generation Alpha, they could have their hands full with the generations after that. AI is not going to make life any easier. I guess in certain ways, we just talked about certain ways it
Yes.
will, but it definitely complicates
It'll bring its
things.
own complications.
Yeah.
Like everything, any technological advance is a
Absolutely.
two-edged sword for no question about it. And maybe that's good. I think that difficulty in life is good for us. Disruption is something that I've never liked personally, but I know how valuable it is. And we were talking earlier about gardening, and Brit loves to garden. Brit loves to garden, and she can be an amazing gardener. She probably is now. She can be an amazing gardener when she's 60. So
That's my goal.
exactly.
That's the plan.
Yes. But how even a seed has to literally like break open in order
Right.
for it to grow, right? It can't just remain in the status that it is. And the ground has to be broken. You can't just drop a seed on the ground. You have to break open the ground. You have to disrupt it. You have
Yeah.
to introduce things into it that are not part of its nature, right?
Absolutely. I'll go like a step further and say, your plants, after you've put them in the greenhouse and allowed them to grow for such a period of time, and you do coddle them to some extent, if you will, in the greenhouse, they have to go through a period of hardening.
Yeah.
You have to take them out. You have to let them kind of flow in the wind and be exposed to the elements.
Yeah.
And if you don't do that, then when you go to transplant them, they're not going to survive, right? And so, parenting is somewhat like that,
It's
I
so
think,
much like that.
in a lot of ways. I do find
And it's hard because we want to keep them in the greenhouse
I
their whole lives.
know, and they're safe in the greenhouse.
Yes.
And frankly, it's easier to be a parent in the greenhouse.
Oh, totally.
Do you know what I mean? Like they're all
Absolutely.
contained in one area. I just throw a little water in there, make sure the lights turn on and off. I don't even have to do that. My husband's an electrician and he's wired it up to where there's a timer and everything
There you
on
go.
it. So it's way easy for me. But yeah, it's hard as a parent. It's hard to find that balance of letting your kids be exposed to some level of adversity, and at the same time making sure that you're not overdoing it, making sure that their confidence remains intact and that they know that they're loved and supported. It's a challenge.
Well, and even outside of the greenhouse, because I'm loving this garden analogy
Yes.
right now. So now you've planted this plant out in the elements, right, where it's subject to uncontrolled,
Right.
things,
Yeah.
Wind, rain,
Yes.
beating sun, no sun,
My
whatever
golden
it is.
retriever, she loves to eat my plants. She is the biggest pest I have in my
Adversity,
garden right now.
right, in the form of the
Absolutely.
golden
There's
retriever.
not much to survive though from the golden retriever.
But and so, and that's how it gets stronger, right?
Right.
And you have to do it in order for it to, in order
flourish.
for it to flourish.
Yeah.
You can't leave it in the greenhouse the whole time. And so, I think greenhouse parenting, for lack of a better word, is more about the parent
Right.
most of the time.
The
'cause-
convenience for the
Exactly.
parent.
And
Yeah.
the emotional convenience of not having to go through the difficulty, not having to go to school and have that conversation with your son and with his counselor and the subsequent conversations. Those are difficult for sure.
Yeah.
That's adversity, but it's so good because now your relationship is deepened with him and he can talk to you about things that he maybe didn't think he could talk to about before. And now he's like, oh, my parents are a safe space to talk about this. And maybe that's the middle ground we're trying to reach with, even in employment settings is like, even when they're out in the garden, you still have to nurture them,
Right.
right? You still have
Right.
to do, maybe it's a different type of nurturing, but there has to be something. You can't just throw them in there and never do anything else, never water, never fertilize, never
Right.
weed or anything. You still have to do all those things,
Yeah.
but yet let it kind of do its thing too.
Yeah. There's this interesting analogy to continue on this gardening theme.
I love this because the AI is going to say this is a gardening podcast. So that's
perfect.
totally good.
Even better.
That'll be exactly.
Even better. And Dave knows this because we've talked about it. But, with your tomatoes specifically, you get to a point where once you plant them, you have to do some pruning, right? And
Yes.
you have to cut off some branches. And as the suckers come on, you have to trim those off. And in a lot of ways, it can be a little awkward because you feel like you're kind of, terrorizing your plant to some extent. But if you don't do that, the fruit just won't be as big as it would before, right? And so in certain ways, I find a lot of parallels to being a solid leader to gardening in certain ways. It's all about what are the resources that we have? How do we make the most of those resources? Sometimes having hard conversations with people or having the difficult conversation or making hard decisions is part of helping people flourish.
Yeah.
And I think too often, especially here in Utah, we tend to have a very we tend to be very nice and we tend to want to be around other individuals who don't create a lot of conflict.
Right. An emotional greenhouse.
Yeah, a bit of that's a great way of putting it. There's an emotional greenhouse. We're just conflict adverse, I would say.
Yes.
And so one of the hardest things as an HR practitioner often is to get those leaders comfortable with getting really uncomfortable and having those conversations. There are definite times when HR has to jump in and be part of those conversations, but in an ideal scenario, you're coaching that manager to have the hard conversations, and then you're supporting them from there. Because if HR is the one having the hard conversations all the time, it's just not effective.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay, if gardening is not in the title of this podcast somewhere, then we're gonna have to go in and retitle it or something like that, because I love that. Brit, you've been amazing to talk with, and I appreciate your authenticity. You're a great parent. You're a great leader. It's amazing. So thank you for coming in and sharing.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah. This was so fun.
Thank you. And thanks to everyone else for listening today. Remember that change starts with you, and together we increase our mental health momentum.